Well, hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Julian and Titus show, starring Julian and Titus. You know, the stage select was a fun experiment. I think it served its purpose in its time, but I really thought that I could kind of just strike out on my own and do my own thing, and not have to pay all those guys at the stage select studio. So. Justin and I have gone our separate ways. I've cut Abramo and Morgan and Richard Harden loose. Just don't need them anymore. I can just do it. I can just do the show from the privacy of my own home. I think it's going to be just as entertaining with just one person as it is with two. I don't see a scenario where I just end up rambling for no reason for 3 hours and end up talking about the good old days. And I don't see that being a problem at all. There's even a video component to this, which we don't do for the normal thing. That's going to be for the exclusive patrons. Sometimes I'm going to talk like this because that's a thing that you can do when it's just you by yourself. Yeah, this is going swimmingly. See, and as soon as I say that, then everything starts to go off the rails. That's how this goes. No, I thought what we would do today is figured I'd talk for about 10 or 15 minutes about how sick I've been recently, then maybe ramble about my kids for 20-ish minutes, talk about a video game that I've been playing for about 5 minutes, and then we'll do some news, and then I'll read 1 to 2 emails that will send me on hour-long tangents each. I think that will be the way that this goes, and I think it will be a very entertaining show. I don't know where to look. This is a new thing for me. Do I look right into the camera like that? Is that weird? I can't tell because I can only see myself in the video peripherally, and I don't know what it actually looks like. Hey. Yeah, so I've been talking for about 3 minutes now. So let me go ahead and take a quick break to read some ad copy, and then we'll get back to the main show. Men, are you having trouble getting it up? Are you not performing the way that you used to in the bedroom? Is Space Mountain closed for repairs? That's a Ric Flair reference. If that's the case, what you need is Hammer Extract. It's a special blend of tinctures and oils and herbs, all naturally sourced from the deepest regions of the Amazon, to provide you with the kick that you need for those special times with your special someone. You just kind of slather that on, wait about 10 minutes or so, and you're good to go. It's all natural. Just will really get the job done. Jackhammer your wife until she throws her back out. You can do that with Hammer Extract. Go to the Hammer website, and that's HAMR, by the way, and use the promo code Julian for 25% off your first order. Hammer Extract. The hammer is your penis. All right, and we're back. So what have I been up to since the last time I got on this microphone? I dropped Marvel Rivals. I actually uninstalled it. I was still having fun with it. I was still enjoying like the overall gameplay loop. I think I was doing decently well. I had actually branched out into using Venom as a tank, and I was having fun with him. Started using Luna Snow as a healer, and wasn't doing terrible. I was actually doing pretty well with her, actually. I was going to say I wasn't doing terrible. I was actually doing pretty well with her, even though she's a much more aim-focused type character, but I was actually holding my own pretty well. It was a couple things, though. I noticed I could already see that the overall skill level of the people that I was playing with was rapidly increasing. And so I felt that I was already getting kind of to the point where I was just becoming a liability in a lot of cases and not really improving. I'm sure if I spent like a lot of time on it, that would work, but that's my thing with multiplayer games is I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I don't think I even hit 10 hours. Oh, hey, Baltar, he's there in the background if you're watching the video. I don't think I even spent, oh, good. Yeah, that's good, little man. That's some really good background audio. Thank you. I don't think I'd even hit 10 hours on Marvel Rivals. But the other really big thing was that the first official season launched, and they announced that they're adding the Fantastic Four, which is good. I felt that they were like sorely missing from the roster. Like I felt that they should have at least had one or two of them represented in the game at launch. And I like the designs of everybody except for Mr. Fantastic. I just kind of think he's overall way too ripped and buff looking. And I've never liked Reed with a beard. I think it makes him look too cool, and Reed's not supposed to look cool. He's supposed to look like a dork. But really what ended up happening is I looked at the skins that they added for season 1, and I realized that they've already lost the plot. Like, I know the character designs are already pretty divisive. I typically like most of them. I actually think like the Namor a base design is really cool. I've never liked the original version of Namor. Just dumb Speedo wearing Spock with, angel wings on his ankles. Just never a good look. He was pretty cool with the black vest, like in the early aughts or whatever, but he's never really had a good look. And I think the actual Marvel Rivals one is pretty good style for him. But the stuff so they are adding certain comic inspired skins, and there's a handful of them in the new battle pass, but a lot of them are just NetEase kind of doing their own thing, and the characters end up looking completely unrecognizable. And like it's whatever. It's definitely a matter of taste. You can do that. It makes them feel like way more Overwatchy than even the game already felt to me. And I think with characters that have such amazing back history and lore and designs to work off of, I really want to see what these guys do with, like, take Wolverine from, well, that's a bad example because he's only got the one arm. Let's do like Days of Future Past, like X-Men, right? And let's see their take on it, right? Or even like Fox X-Men designs. Like, they're not my favorites, but it'd be kind of interesting to see what NetEase does with those old motorcycle outfits. But I'm just really wasn't digging it, and I felt that, like, oh, well, if this is the path that they're going, I don't see the reason to keep going. We'll see with, like, as they add new characters and stuff like that. I'm sure I'll hop back in one day, but kind of put it down for now, and there we are. The big thing that I played during since the last season ended was Fantasian Neo Dimension, which is Mistwalker's game. It used to be on Apple Arcade. It was stuck on Apple Arcade for a while, and I think it was released in 2 parts. And I really wanted to play it because it's Mistwalker. It's Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, making a game that was obviously very inspired by Final Fantasy VII. Just from a design standpoint, like a graphic standpoint. What they did is, instead of doing pre-rendered CG backgrounds, they actually made dioramas of each environment, like really painstaking, super detailed little dioramas that they then 3D scanned and then put the 3D polygonal characters into. So it still gives it that feeling of being polygonal characters against a pre-rendered background, but it's not the same. And also, since they've been scanned in 3D, the camera can actually pan and shift around the environments. It's not a static background like Final Fantasy VII, 8, and 9 were. It's actually a double-edged sword because the camera pans a lot, and it's a really good case for why I am a big supporter of tank controls on those old PlayStation 1 era survival horror games like Resident Evil. And it's because when the camera shifts wildly, or the camera angle shifts wildly, if up is always forward, there's no problem. You're still just advancing. It doesn't mess up. In a game like this, where the camera wildly shifts, all of a sudden, the analog stick doesn't want to go where it was going before. And there's times when it feels like you're controlling like a drunk dude with like reversed controls and you're underwater. It feels really shitty. But it is a very by the numbers turn-based RPG. And for some people, you're going to hear that and you'll be like, "Oh, that's exactly what I want. Oh, great." But this is a by the numbers turn-based RPG by someone who I consider to be a master of the genre. Doing a game that ultimately feels like an amateur who was inspired by Final Fantasy VII, like grew up and that was like their first Final Fantasy game. And then they made their little indie RPG and didn't know anything about writing RPGs or making an RPG or anything like that. Just very first game that they worked on. And it feels amateur. And that breaks my heart to say. I think the characters, like just across the board, are as boilerplate and rote as you can get. I don't know, like it's good and bad all around. Like I enjoy the fact that the cast is a little bit more diverse as far as age goes. You've got like a kid in there that's like I think around like 10 or 12. You've got a older man in there who's probably like in his like mid 50s, maybe even older. But then it does like the same like shtick that they used to do back on Final Fantasy 4 and 6, where it's like, "Oh, you're an old man. Oh, you're a bratty kid," and then just back and forth forever. And it wasn't a problem for me until I started listening to No One Can Know About This, and then I once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and it's like, oh wow, you did that again, okay. And it also has like the big gameplay feature is that you can send enemies to the Dimension. That's what it's called in the game, the Dimension. Basically, it's this item that sucks up random encounters and it stores all the enemies from said random encounters until you hit the button and decide to fight everything that you've got stored up in one big battle. And it just seems like another instance of RPGs being very ashamed of being RPGs and being like, we're going to find a way that you don't really have to engage with the battle system all that much. At least that's kind of the feeling that this system gives me. But really what ultimately ends up happening is the battle, like the random battle frequency is as high as it was back on like old NES games. Like your enemies are being sent to the Dimension like every few steps. And you probably want to start to clear those out once you're at about like 25 to 30 enemies. So what ends up happening is that you're getting into battles about as often as a modern RPG, but you're now fighting like 25 to 30 enemies at the same time. So those battles end up feeling longer and more drawn out, but you still feel like you're getting into the same number of battles as you would in something like a Dragon Infinite Wealth or an Octopath Traveler 2, something like that. It does have a really cool feature, and I think this really speaks to the fact that it was developed for Apple, like an iPhone to begin with. A lot of the spells and a lot of abilities you can actually like kind of curve them to hit as many enemies as you can, because they're expecting you to have to deal with a huge group of enemies. And I will say that is a cool part of Fantasian, where just filling the screen with a shit ton of enemies at a time is kind of a cool thing to see. There's certain boss encounters, for lack of a better term, where you're fighting like 100 enemies and you'll just like annihilate like 10 of them at a go, and then like 10 more just pop up in their place, and you just keep going until you take care of all of them. And that's how the Dimension battles work. And so it is pretty neat to be able to kind of finesse certain ability or certain attacks to hit like 5 to 8 enemies in one go. But it also ends up making the battles really boring, because there's also like a lot of like little power-ups that you can get within the field, where if your attack passes through one of them, you'll get like a damage buff, or you'll get the most egregious one is just get a second turn. So if you have a character that has like a huge AoE attack and it also happens to hit that free turn power up, then you get to just do that again. And there's time, and also like the enemies will waste turns on like buffs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of times when you're just like mowing through these huge groups of enemies and they're not doing anything back. And it feels like, why am I even here? And I guess the reason that you're there is for the boss fights, because those are really kind of the standouts of Fantasian. And the boss fights are very good. They're very challenging. It's like a huge uptick, especially in the back half of the game. But it's a pretty big jump in strategy and difficulty, and it's definitely a game where you should be using items and stuff like that. Like you shouldn't be holding anything back. And you get items at a plentiful enough clip, especially because the main character is kind of a thief to begin with, and he eventually gets an ability where he can steal on a regular attack. So you just start like amassing items. So it's not a problem to use the stuff that you're given. And a lot of the fights do have like, you've got to be equipped well. If this enemy has a certain element, you probably want to have an accessory that guards against that element. You want to be buffing yourself with, the equivalent of barrier or something like that. You want to speed yourself up. You want to slow the enemy down. If you can, you want to blind the enemy. Like things like that are actually useful until they're not. And I think that's one of the big things about Fantasian is it's a very uneven game. And I think part of that is because it was developed in 2 parts. And it doesn't feel like a long game. And then it suddenly feels like a very long game. Like I think the first part of the game is only like 12 or 15 hours. And it's a very, very basic affair just across the board. The story is basic. The characters are basic. There's really like, you don't get access to the deeper mechanics of the game as far as like character growth or abilities until that second part. And that's a really long time in an RPG to go, where it's just like, oh, I can fight. I can use, these handful of abilities, and I can use item. That's what I got. Cool. Especially when the story is not all that great. I think it's a game that probably isn't served by being voice acted. The voice acting's fine. I don't think it's particularly like stellar. I also don't think it's particularly well written. And I think I wouldn't have as big a problem with it if it was just text on the screen. I kind of have that theory about like older Final Fantasies too. Like a lot of people are clamoring for like a remake of Final Fantasy IX, and I'm like, do not make those characters talk. Just don't do it. Just don't, and also don't remake that game. You can play it in HD now. It's fine. You don't need to touch it. Go make something new. But I got to the second half, and then it gets more interesting, because then your characters start to get their divine artifacts, which is kind of the big leveling mechanic, and then they get access to like a whole like skill board. It's a little bit like the sphere grid, and you're getting SP when you level up, and you're using those points to get new abilities, and specifically, more importantly, new passives. The passives are actually like very important in that back half of the game, because the difficulty skyrockets in the second half of the game in a way that at first was actually pretty cool and kind of satisfying. Like I said, those boss fights are definitely a high point of Fantasian. But then it gets to a point where like every boss ends up becoming a puzzle boss, but it's a puzzle boss where it's like, oh, you didn't know that this boss halfway through was going to cover the ground in a malaise that continuously hits you with this specific affliction, and the only way to get around it is to have already had equipped an accessory that makes you immune to that affliction. So, die and reload and re-equip and try again. No way that you could have prepared for that. I guess technically, since you can switch party members in and out of the party, I guess if you're running around with, certain characters, like maybe your healer's always equipped with like, you have like basically 2 main healers and then like a backup healer. So I guess if you have those 3 kind of trying to handle the spread of really dangerous status ailments, maybe you could succeed that way. But it gets to a point where like certain enemies are doing like, certain attacks. If you aren't buffed, they're doing like 6,000 hit points of damage in one attack. And keep in mind that at that point of the game, like most of your characters have around 5,000 to low 6,000, range of hit points. So if you don't get completely party wiped by one attack, you're then spending multiple turns trying to get those party members back up just in time to have that attack hit again. And so then it becomes an answer of like, well, I guess I should grind, but the game starts to throttle your experience gain after level 35. Like if you're fighting anything that is not above your level, you're just getting shit for experience. And so the only solution is either is to find a place where enemies are stronger, but you might not have gotten to an area where the enemies are stronger yet. So suffer as G did. I don't know. It started to become more and more annoying, and it was I was almost at the end of the game, and I was like, okay, I can see. I looked up a guide to see how much more I had, and I was like, okay, I can see that I'm close to the end. There's a lot of like side stuff that's optional. Let me just go ahead and like go through this next everything, the next to last dungeon. There might have been a little bit more. And I got to the boss of that dungeon, and it was definitely one of those situations where it was pretty much a stat check. And also because I didn't have like, there were certain side quests where, like basically you get to a point where like you have to do these you don't have to, but there's these elemental trials that basically represents like each of the main characters. And if you complete those elemental trials, you unlock like basically the Ga levels of their elemental spells, to use a Final Fantasy term, like the highest level of their elemental spells. And basically this boss was like a stat check where it's like, oh, you don't have the damage output, and you also don't have the levels to withstand this damage that the boss is bringing in. So get fucked. And I was like, okay, well, let me go and try this first elemental trial. And and this is a funny thing about Fantasian. It feels a lot like a porn game. If you start to play a lot of porn games, because a lot of them are made by, again, amateur first time game developers. And because they don't have anybody to be accountable to, and they're learning their craft as they're going, the games end up becoming like very uneven, where a game will start off as one thing, and then as you get deeper and deeper into the game, they start adding mechanics, they start adding this and that, like the graphics get better, the posing gets better, but also the game gets more complicated. You'll see like, oh, now all of a sudden there's a map where there wasn't a map before, or oh, now there's this weird like combat system where there wasn't any fighting in this game up to this point. Fantasian feels that way. Like I said, you get more than you get to that second half of the game, and now all of a sudden you have access to this sphere grid type thing. You have the divine artifacts, which is, alluded to in the first half of the game, but you don't get to utilize them. And like one of the towns that you visit just randomly has like it's a massive like capital city. And so when you're going from district to district, it's like almost like old Final Fantasy games where you're like a very small character, and you're on like a approximation of the town, even though there are like overworld parts of the game already, but this is almost like a more like micro version of the overworld. And it's just that one town, and it doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't change anything mechanically. It's just they decided to do it that way. for reasons. But when you get to these elemental trials, all of a sudden you're in a first person dungeon crawler, because I don't know, sure, why not? And it was levels, and also at this point of the game they start giving you like level recommendations, and so this was like a level 45 dungeon. I was like, okay, cool. Like most of my characters are like around 49 to 50, so that usually that's a pretty big spread in Fantasian as far as like if you know, if you're 5 levels down from a recommendation, you're gonna have a bad time. But if you're over, then you're probably good to go. And then I got to the boss of that dungeon, and I was not good to go. I was so not good to go. And that was kind of when I was like, you know what? Like, I'm not having any fun. I was never having any fun. Like, it was never, like, people are over the moon for Fantasian. And it's one of those games that makes me feel crazy. And I honestly think that it's one of those things, I attempted to watch the review from the Night Sky Prince, who is one of the more like insane Final Fantasy fanboys, and just effusive praise, like just talking about one of the greatest games ever made, blah, blah, blah. And I honestly think, and I feel this to my core, if this game did not have Hironobu Sakaguchi's name on it, no one would give a shit. I think people would look at it and they would be like, oh yeah, I guess that's a decent one of those. Like, it's not doing anything really interesting or new. And, you know, in a lot of ways, it feels like a massive step back from games that came out almost 30 years ago. But I guess that's a thing that you can play if you want. I really feel that would have been the thing if it didn't have the name attached to it. And it's also really well known because this is Uematsu's reported last full soundtrack that he's working on. And I remember before the game came out, because it's published by Square Enix, which is interesting, that one of the big features is that you can like randomize the battle themes to music from, or you can select from specific games. But it's got like all 6 of the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. It's got Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's got Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker and Dawn Trail and 16. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to listen to like old Final Fantasy music. I want to hear Uematsu's new stuff. And then I very quickly said, oh no, actually no, let's turn on this old stuff. Let's get these old Uematsu songs in there, because the new stuff is not good. I think I played it for about 35, maybe almost like close to 40 hours. There was like maybe 2 tracks where I was like, oh, here we go. This is good. The battle music, I think, is kind of awful. The boss fight music in general is I think just terrible. And then there's certain tracks that I just feel are like nails on a chalkboard for me. And it's again, it pains me to say that. I love Uematsu. This ain't it. It kind of, as a longtime comic book fan, it really sucks when you see like a comic book artist like get to a certain point in their career and they don't got it anymore. You'll see like a late Neil Adams piece of art, or like anything that Frank Miller does today, or anything that John Romita Jr. does today, and it's just like, oh God, no, what is that? And that's kind of how I feel about the soundtrack for Fantasian. It's like, did something happen? Did you lose your ability to hear music? I don't know. I know that sounds really harsh, but I just really, like, it's not that I didn't vibe with the music. I actively hate most of the soundtrack of Fantasian. And at a certain point, like, once I realized how much I was going to have to grind and how much I still had to do, just to make sure that my characters were geared up and leveled properly to, do those final battles, I just didn't want to be bothered. I do think it's cool that these boss fights are challenging enough where it actually matters what gear you have equipped and what abilities you have unlocked. And even then, you still have to have strategy about them. I think that's good. I'm not like, I just don't, the game wasn't good enough for me to want to put in the extra work to get to that point. And yeah, I do not recommend Fantasian, really at all. And I realize that that's kind of already like two bummers that I've talked about in a row as far as video games. So I did want to like close out this part of the podcast with something that I am enjoying, which is Alone in the Dark. The I guess it's more of like a reboot-quel. It's like a reboot slash I guess it's reboot make. It's like a reboot slash remake of the original Alone in the Dark. And I remember when they announced it, I was like, well, I've never liked Alone in the Dark. I gave the original Alone in the Dark for PlayStation 1 a 12 out of 100 in my fanzine PlayStation Revolution. And to be fair, I played it after Resident Evil, so I was like, oh, this is just a terrible ripoff of Resident Evil, even though at the time I didn't know that it was a precursor to Resident Evil. And then I didn't care for the new Nightmare, and then I didn't even touch the 2008 one. Just couldn't be bothered. But then they released a demo before the game came out, and the demo was pretty impressive. And so I had it on my radar for a while, and then the reviews came out, and the reviews were pretty middling, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I can sit on this and not pick it up right away. And so then I ended up picking up on sale at I think it was like right before I had sent my PS5, my original PS5 to my friends, and I didn't have a system for those couple months waiting for the Pro to come out. And then, of course, I was kind of playing a bunch of stuff to get ready for Game of the Year. I was like, Alone in the Dark's probably not going to be in contention, so I don't even need to worry about this. I'll play it during break. Now that I'm playing it, I really wish that I had played it earlier, because I would have fought for Alone in the Dark. I think ultimately when we come back, I'm not going to put it on my top 10 because it's too close. Like we're only a week away. And I guess that's what I meant to say at the top of the show. The reason I'm doing this stupid bullshit, is because I realized on the calendar that we were only going to be dark for 1 week, and I thought it was 2. And I was like, well, I don't want that 1 week gap in the schedule. Like I can just throw something together and it'll be fine. And we'll just put something in the feed. And, that way, like we had something come out every week of hiatus. That'll be cool. But yeah, so I think, I'm going to finish this game probably in the next day or two. But that's too close for me to really like honestly put it on my top 10. But if I had played this like 6 months ago, I feel like I probably would have tried to sneak it onto that top 10. I really love it. I think it's got just incredible style. It's set in the 30s, which I didn't even realize. And the story is that you're going to investigate the disappearance of. There's 2 characters now. There's Edward Carnby, who's like the character that I remember from like the old games. He's the private investigator. And then you have Emily Hartwood, who she's looking for her uncle, and he's been staying at this. I mean, for the lack of a better term, it's an asylum, but it's more of like a rest home. It's like a really old, like fancy estate home in New Orleans. That has like a lot of history behind it, and it used to be like a plantation, and it's been repurposed a couple times. There was like a weird art collective that lived there for like 10 years. But it's since been repurposed as kind of like a convalescent home. It's a place where, the very wealthy people go to, it's kind of like a rehab and psychoanalysis place. And, and some people just go there to rest. Right. But she's looking for her uncle, and she goes to talk to, because she'd gotten some disturbing letters from him. And so she wants to check in on him. But once they get there, they find out that uncle is missing. And then horror ensues. And you get to choose between Edward and Emily. And I decided to go with Emily because I thought, oh, the familial connection might be interesting. And I'm interested to see, they're not exactly doing like the zapping system from Resident Evil 2 PSX, but it is a game that has like two sides to the story. Like, I don't think it's a thing where, at least I hope it is in this way. I don't think that ammo that I pick up as Emily is then no longer there for Edward. If it is, he's fucked, because I've been picking up every bit of ammo that I can get. But there are like collectibles, like there's sets of collectibles called lanyards that open up like different weapons, different pieces of lore, little things like that. They're very satisfying to complete, and they're like each set of lanyards is 3 items. But there's certain collections that you can only complete by going through both sides of the game. And I find that very fascinating. Like I'm 100% going to play as Edward after I finish as Emily. But yeah, it's got like this really cool, like 30s, like jazz, like backbeat to a lot of the soundtrack. The first few chapters take place like during the afternoon and into the evening. So you've got like these really gorgeous sunbeams coming through this really beautifully designed, mansion that just has a lot of detail and really kind of grounds you in that time frame. It also has a lot of characters. A lot of horror games, you're kind of stuck with like your main character, and then you might run into like 1 or 2 weirdos. But here there's like, there's a full staff, and then there's also, I think, like 5 to 6 people that are staying there. And you encounter them. And yeah, some of them are really weird. But some of them are more normal and like have a lot of personality to them. And I think it really adds something to the game. And also, I don't think that this came out on last gen consoles. I don't see how it could. Because it's very much doing like a thing that I feel is a thing that couldn't have been done before, which is, because I think you could say like, oh, you're thinking, or you might be thinking to yourself, well, if it's all bright and sunny and there's like interesting, like affable characters, like where's the tension? The tension comes in the fact that sometimes you open a door and everything's fucked, and there's monsters that pop up out of nowhere, and you never know when it's going to happen. And I think that's a thing that you couldn't really do before, like these speedier hard drives where, you like it. I'm saying you open a door, everything is normal, and then all of a sudden, you get waylaid by a monster, and it's not necessarily jump scary. But it does keep the tension up there. There's some elements of like the Shining in there, like just kind of like tone and stuff like that. Like I got to a part where I walked through a door, and all of a sudden I was at a speakeasy, and I was talking to one of the women that's staying at the asylum, who's like a flapper, and we're having a conversation, and it felt very much like that bar scene from The Shining. But I was asking about the location of this shipping warehouse, and she says like, oh, well, it's right here, and she kind of turns Emily, like she kind of puts a hand on Emily's back and kind of turns her, and then all of a sudden the scene is completely shifted, and you're like on a dock with in I don't know, the industrial part of New Orleans, and there's the warehouse in front of you, and it just on a dime like that. It's really cool. I think the puzzles are actually really good. Some of them have actually been a little more than I can handle, and I had to look up a walkthrough like once or twice. But the ones that I was able to piece together myself, I felt really proud of. I think the combat is fine. I think it's right on par with the more recent Resident Evil games, which is to say, it's not great, but it gets the job done. I honestly am hard pressed to find anything in this game so far. And again, it could shit the bed in the last couple hours, but I'm almost done with it. At least on this first playthrough. And I'm hard pressed to find anything in Alone in the Dark that doesn't put it like right in line with the recent Resident Evil games. And I honestly think it's another thing, kind of like Fantasian with having Sakaguchi's name attached to it. I think it's just the fact that it does not have the name Resident Evil in the title. I think that's the only reason that people didn't give this one the time of day. Like, I think if this was called Resident Evil: Alone in the Dark, people would have been talking about it for Game of the Year considerations. Like, full stop. It's really high quality. I'm thoroughly invested. I can't wait to see it through to the end. And I really can't recommend it enough. I'm playing it before the Silent Hill 2 remake, so we'll see how I end up feeling about that. I feel like the pacing of this one is just kind of like immaculate. I think it gives you plenty of time to decompress after scary parts, but there's always that tension of, I just picked up this like key item. Am I going to turn around and everything's all bad again? And I'm going to be fighting for my life. Same thing with like the combat. Like, you'll get to a point where you're like, in really excellent survival horror fashion, you're flush with items. Like, you got plenty of healing items. You got plenty of bullets. And then all of a sudden, now I'm limping along. I've got like 1 healing flask left and got like 4 bullets. Fuck me. But that's what you want in a survival horror game. And then, hopefully you'll slowly build that arsenal back up for the next time that you really need it. It's also got like actual melee weapons. They do break, but they're sturdy enough that, you can take out a couple enemies before you have to worry about it. There's a decent dodge. So I think it's got all the bases covered, and I'm really glad that I'm playing it, and I can't wait to see it through to the end. So yeah, about 45 minutes into here, I thought I would talk about some newsy stuff, just to totally date this episode. But also it was just kind of stuff that I wanted to talk about, because it's another one of those things where I've got different opinions than most people. It's my lot in life. But hear me out. Sushi Glory Hole. Don't leave. Hear me out. It's a good idea. So I think the big news of this week was that it was brought to light that Sony just recently canceled 2 more of their live service type games, specifically games that were in development from Sony Bend Studios and Bluepoint Studios, which is probably the worst part of this whole scenario. Because I do agree that, like, you don't put those studios on a bet for live service. You let those studios cook on their own thing. I still think it's strange that Sony didn't allow Bend to make a sequel to Days Gone, because and the reasoning was that, it didn't review that well, but it sold really well. Like, I everything that I heard about Days Gone is that it sold really well. Like, it was really popular with players. So it seems like that's probably enough to warrant a sequel and let them do their thing. Or if they didn't want to do that, I mean, I think it sounded like they did want to do that, or let them do something else. They definitely have the skill to put together like a really good game. And then the thing with Bluepoint, they had come off the big launch success of the Demon's Souls remake. It is a remake, not a remaster. I keep hearing people call it a remaster, and that's doing them and that game a huge disservice. They remade it from the ground up. But, and I think a lot of people were more angry about that because they were being tasked with making a multiplayer God of War game instead of a remake of Bloodborne. To which I would say, why do you want a remake of Bloodborne so badly? You can play Bloodborne just fine on a PlayStation 5. You can also play it just fine on a PlayStation 4. Does it run at 120 frames per second? No, but that didn't seem to stop people in 2014. They seemed to like it just fine. Why not have Bluepoint do a Bloodborne 2? Dream a little bigger, darling. But the idea of having them locked away for, let's say the last 4 years working on a multiplayer God of War game just seems just really dumb. But I see a lot of people reacting to this saying like, oh yeah, it's because of like the failure of Concord and Concord this and Concord that. I don't think it's because of the failure of Concord. I think they were already pulling out of this whole thing before Concord was even released. I think there must have been some sort of like number crunching somewhere where they thought it might be more financially viable to just shit Concord out the door and let it do what it do, than just cancel it outright. And I bet the thinking there was that, well, we didn't expect Helldivers 2 to do anything, and it blew up. So maybe Concord has a chance. And if it doesn't, then we'll just kill it and whatever. And we're already in the process of getting rid of this other stuff. And it seems like a lot of the stuff with Sony was definitely like a Jim Ryan initiative. He was really bullish about games as a service and that being like the way forward. My thing is that like, yeah, like, I think the thing that's not taken into account with all this stuff is because they'll it's like they were gonna make 16 live service games, and it's like, well, yeah, because you throw 16 out there, and then if 2 of them hit, that pays for the other 14 and then some. That's kind of how that thing works. Is it a great idea? No. Could like really talented studios like Sony Bend and Blue Point be better tasked with doing their own thing or doing something either original or a sequel to an existing popular IP? Yeah, absolutely. Is the idea of a multiplayer God of War fucking stupid? Yeah, because personally, I don't think that God of War 2018 and Ragnarok are all that fun to play. But it's been done before. They did it back with God of War Ascension on the PlayStation 3. And I think that's the kind of the weird thing for me with the approach to Sony's live service initiative that I think is now, on the outs, is that it wasn't a lot of like create original stuff, although there was some of that. Obviously, Concord was an original thing. But a lot of it was like, let's try to shoehorn live service, or let's try to carve out a live service element out of our existing popular games. And it to me, it feels like, the Xbox 360 all over again, where that in that era, like everybody was trying to avoid people, like reselling games. So they, if you could beat Dead Space 2 in 14 hours, they wanted something in there that kept you playing it long enough to where you wouldn't trade it in right away. So they shoehorned multiplayer into everything. And, for the most part, that was a colossal failure and probably could have been used for better things, but games were cheaper to make back then. And also some of those were popular. I remember people liking the multiplayer in BioShock 2. And I know The Last of Us multiplayer was really popular to the point that a lot of people were really upset when they canceled the standalone Last of Us multiplayer. And that's the thing that it's like, you can't have it both ways, guys. Like, you can't be like angry that like they were trying to make live service games and also angry that they canceled a live service game. Pick a lane. That's my feeling anyway. Now, I think one of the big ones that people are complaining about is that, I think they also canceled, they also, I think in the stories, like a lot of them were quietly canceled, like that Spider-Man multiplayer, which thank fuck. Like I could see like a co-op mode in like Spider-Man 3 that could probably be fun, but like a full on like multiplayer thing just sounds like just the most annoying thing ever. But there was also like a Horizon MMO that got quietly scrapped. But that's a game that I actually think, I guess it depends on what your definition of MMO is. If they were trying for like a Final Fantasy 14 / World of Warcraft thing, no. But if what they were actually trying to go for was like a tribe-based survival game a la Ark with more of a narrative, and like you join like specific tribes, and so that's kind of how the multiplayer works out. Like you're with the Banuk or the Karja or the Nora or stuff like that, and they have access to like different abilities and stuff like that, and you're also like taming the Robo Dinos and also like building things and stuff like that. That sounds kind of awesome, actually. I could be into that. I like the idea of a survival game. I need more narrative. And, Ark I find fascinating, but ultimately impenetrable. But something that plays like Horizon, and has those elements in it and has a multiplayer component, That could be cool. I really don't understand people's, it's getting almost vicious at this point. Like people's like rejection of that series, that extremely well selling series, by the way, like double digit millions on both of the main games. But it doesn't help when they're doing things like Lego Horizon. And if they wanted to do this, like, I feel like there's like if this was 20 years ago, there would have been a Horizon kart game in the works that we were going to hear about at E3. It does have the danger of that happening. I feel that like Elden Ring, I think it's kind of almost in the same boat where, like they had the main game, super successful. They did the DLC, super successful. And now they've got this like multiplayer thing that's coming out this year. And that kind of reminds me of like, when you would have like Turok Rage Wars on the N64 or that Ratchet and Clank multiplayer game that came out. I don't even remember the name of it. I never played that one. It sits in that same space to me, like this weird, like standalone multiplayer component to a successful single player. So it's not like this hasn't been attempted before. But at the end of the day, I am very glad that Sony's kind of pulling out of this. Again, I don't think that you can lay it all at Concord's feet. I think that's missing like a lot of what actually happened, and also just like really heaping a lot of shit on those poor developers. Like they were really dealt a raw hand. And I think it really has more to do with like a change of leadership and goals. And, but I think it's I do think it's for the best. I think that you should you should definitely try to do a lot of different things, whether that be multiplayer games or games as a service games, or, I think my big thing is scope, right? Like making smaller scoped games, making larger scoped games, making medium scoped games. I think it would be cool if like Sony had a studio that put out like an RPG again, right? Like it doesn't have to be Legend of Dragoon 2, but I'd be interested to see what they would do with that. More on that later. Or actually right now, I guess. Because the last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get out of here is the Switch 2 reveal that happened a week ago as I'm recording this. That sure is another Switch. Hooray. I'm really happy for all of you. I really am. Like if I that's what people wanted, that's what people are getting. I deeply dislike the Switch. It's my least favorite Nintendo console. Discounting the Virtual Boy, because like the Virtual Boy doesn't even count. The Virtual Boy is so terrible that everybody knows it's at the bottom of the list. So let's just take the Virtual Boy out of the conversation. The Switch is at the bottom of my list, followed by the N64 and then the Wii U. No, the Wii. I like the Wii U more than the Wii. Because the Wii U is actually HD and it can play Wii games, so I think it's more successful than I think it succeeded at what it was attempting to do more than what the Switch attempted to do. And I've said it. Actually, I don't think I've said it on this show. I've said it on Nerds Without Pants multiple times. I think the Switch is a bad standalone console. Like it's just woefully underpowered, and it's also a bad portable. And I think also because it splits the difference between the two, it means that Nintendo stopped making games that occupied that like Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS realm where they were very different experiences made for a portable system. You don't get those anymore. And those were actually my favorite Nintendo things. But Switch doesn't do it for me. And it's funny because like it now, Switch 2 was revealed and we don't have a lot of information yet, but a lot of the specs have leaked and stuff like that. And it really does seem that like we're probably looking at like a PS4 Pro level of power at best, possibly slightly lower than that. And it's like Nintendo just doesn't want to let that generation die because, and I guess, things change. Like we can't, people will probably push back on me about this, but you got to remember that Nintendo kicked off the 8th generation. Like the Wii U came out before the PS4 and the Xbox One. That was their next generation console. And then it tanked. And so then they scrambled to release the Switch, which was still, in my opinion, part of that generation. It was slightly more powerful than the Wii U, but not by much. It was mainly just that, like, it was a different form factor doing a different thing. But it was still on par with that. Like, it wasn't up to snuff with, like, the PS4 or the Xbox One. And so now if the Switch 2 is still in that realm, well, can you really call it their next gen system? I don't think you can. But it doesn't matter because it's going to sell a bajillion units and fuck me. That's fine. I have not been this disinterested in a piece of hardware since the original Xbox, and I love video game hardware. Like I get so, it comes from my days in working in retail. Like I love the feeling. I love reloading. I love the feeling of like opening up like a new piece of hardware for the first time and pulling out all of the bits and bobs and, undoing the twisty ties and taking everything out of the little plastic baggies and all that stuff. Like, oh, it's so good. But Switch 2 does absolutely nothing for me. And I think the thing that really sucks for me, as the concept of it is that it means that they're still going to be doing motion controls. And I think motion controls fucking suck unless you're doing VR, but they're never going to do VR. But they have to keep parity with the Switch 1 games and, whatever Wii games that they re-release. So we're just here forever, apparently. And also I hate the Joy-Con designs. I think they feel bad. I've got large hands. I've got very large hands. And I don't like the way the Joy-Cons feel in my hands. It's like, well, you can just get a Pro Controller. It's like, yeah, but I don't want to have to buy like a separate controller right out of the box. Like it should be fine to use what comes with it. And I know technically it is, but it's never been that way for me. I think the fact that like they showed a brand new game for it and I honestly couldn't tell that it was a brand new game speaks volumes. But the thing that I think really stood out to me is I'm amazed at how much we actually know, or how little we actually know about the Switch 2 after all this time. And, like it was a 2-minute trailer, like that was it. There was no presentation with it. There was no fanfare with it. There was, we'll get more information in April. But video game consoles, like announcements used to be a big fucking deal. And I know things change and, times they are changing. I get that. And I'm trying not to be, too much of the old man yelling at the sky here, but it really kind of cemented my thought that like we lost a lot when we lost E3. And I actually had to go back and look because I started to gaslight. It's very easy for me to gaslight myself into thinking that things didn't happen the way they actually happened. I think it's why I really appreciate A Gamer Looks at 40 so much, because Bill is getting those stories from people who were there and remember. And I think it's important to get that recorded while people still remember, because I am starting to forget stuff. And so I went back to the GameCube because I felt like, well, GameCube, especially for like listeners out there, most of y'all were like, either like teenagers or like, tweens, like when the GameCube came out. So I think that's a really good example to bring forward. So I went back and looked at like the E3 2001 reveal of the GameCube, where Miyamoto, it was like Satoru Iwata making a fairly dry speech, and then Miyamoto coming out and showing the actual cube and showing the controller for the first time. And then there was like the announcement and a tracked mode for Super Smash Bros. Melee, which of course, was a huge thing, made a lot of people pop off. And then they showed more footage of Luigi's Mansion. And but the also important thing then was after that press conference, the E3 show floor opened up, and then you had the press going and getting hands-on with the GameCube and playing the games that were available at the show, doing their write-ups. You got your magazine coverage, you got your EGMs and your Game Pros and stuff like that. You got your websites, your GameStops and your GameSpots and your IGNs and stuff like that, getting the word out there. And it was a very exciting time. And it was a big fucking deal. But then I was like, wait, but that wasn't the first that we heard of it, because we already knew about Project Dolphin. But it was actually a year before that they had already announced the name GameCube and had shown Luigi's Mansion. And that was also, I think, where the infamous Nintendo Space World demo of that Legend of Zelda footage where it was like a mature Link fighting Ganon. That got a lot of people excited. And then when Wind Waker came out years later, they were pissed off. But so GameCube was a known quantity for, well over a year. And even before then, we knew about Project Dolphin. And, you had like a lot of people wondering, like, when are they going to talk about the new Switch? Like it system's getting old. Like what's going on there? And it was like, well, they can't announce anything before the holidays because they want to sell more Switches. And that used to not be a thing. It didn't used to matter. But I realized, like, the big thing that's changed is that video game consoles used to drop in price precipitously as they would get to the tail end of the generation. And so anybody who had waited that long to buy the current generation of consoles, they weren't going to be lining up for the new thing. They had been waiting for the current gen to drop to, I think it used to be, I think the sweet spot was like, for a long time, it was like $100. Right? Like when the PS1 dropped to $100, that was like, oh, okay. And then they sold a shit ton more, same thing like the N64 and stuff like that. And then eventually that started to creep up. I think it was like 129, 149, but still, like, those consoles would be like more than cut in half, by the time that you got to the next generation. And so what would happen is that, you would have the early adopters getting really amped up for the new thing. And then you would have it would usually be followed by the next price drop for getting that last little bit of juice out of that last holiday season from anybody who was still hanging on and hadn't picked up a console yet. But now that doesn't happen. An OLED Switch costs right around what a launch Switch did. So I guess I can see why they would have wanted to try to eke out that many more consoles. I still don't think that the people who were waiting this many years to buy a Switch, I don't think the announcement of a Switch 2 causes them to all of a sudden not buy a Switch. I think they had already made their decision on what they were going to do. So what ends up happening is it just feels like long overdue, and then just fucking nothing, man. Just nothing to show. And just no, and just very sterile. And it was more of just like a, here you go, fuck you. Like we'll come back with you when we actually want to talk about it. And it's just like, cool, man, I guess. Yay. I don't know. I do think that it's going to do wonders for the Xbox Series S. Because I think that with the, because this thing's going to be a juggernaut, and I think people are going to be scrambling to try to get games to work on it. Like, there's already rumors of like Metal Gear Delta and Assassin's Creed Shadows being ported to this probably very underpowered console. But that means that like that'll be great for the Xbox Series S versions. Like, they'll probably be optimized to, to hell and back to make them run as well as they possibly can. And my thing is that, like, I can't justify the purchase anymore. I thought about it before they announced the Switch 2. And I was like, what did I actually play to completion on the Switch? And I rolled credits on Mario Odyssey and Mario Wonder. I didn't 100% them, but I did roll credits on them. I played Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, actually, so never touched that on the Switch. And I played through about half of the Link's Awakening remake, and even though that used to be my favorite Zelda game, I just didn't feel the same attachment to it in the remake. It just didn't do much for me, so I ended up falling off of that. Hated Metroid Dread. And I played to the end of Fire Emblem Three Houses twice, but I didn't finish it either time. The first time, my original Switch died on me. It's the end. That's the other thing. The Switch is the only Nintendo console to straight up just die on me after less than 100 hours of play, mind you. And then when I got my Switch Lite, I played all the way through, and then I got to the next to last battle and just kind of fucked myself over and just couldn't finish it. And then I finished Fire Emblem Engage. And that's it. Like, I've dabbled with a few other games, but not much. Like, I think I bought Bayonetta 3 and played the first couple levels, and I was like, I don't like this! And then proceeded to not play the rest of Bayonetta 3. I own a handful more Switch games that I've just never even messed with. And that's just not a good... Like, I can't justify a $400 to $500 console that I'm gonna play that infrequently. Nintendo does not make the types of games that I'm interested in playing anymore. It's not that they don't make fantastic games. They do. But I like games that are pushing what can be done with story and like blending narrative with actual gameplay. And I feel that, like, you know, Nintendo does innovate in certain like mechanical ways, right? Like, I think the stuff in Odyssey was really cool. I think a lot of the level design of Wonder was like really top notch. Obviously, like, you know, the building mechanic of Tears of the Kingdom is really cool. And, you know, the open world design of Breath of the Wild, really cool. So they've got their moments, but, you know, then they're still coupled with like endless tutorials that treat you like you don't know what a video game is, and just inane story that is usually told through just really annoyingly written dialogue, and very little voice acting. And it's just, I feel that I've evolved beyond that. You know, that's not to say that they can't do stuff that would eventually sway me, but they'd have to be releasing like a lot of like Game of the Year contender level shit, like year after year, for me to actually like buckle down and finally like get one. Cause like Metroid Prime 4 is going to be out on the original Switch, so I can play that there. Not that I'm actually all that excited about it. You know, there'll probably be a handful of things that are cross-platform for a little bit anyway. And honestly, like the stuff that I've even been moderately interested in from Nintendo the last couple of years, I just forgot to buy. I didn't buy the Princess Peach game. I didn't buy that Kirby game. You know, I was interested in them and then just proceeded to completely forget about them. So yeah, but I am, you know, I'm glad that it was finally announced. I'm glad that people are excited about it. You know, is it good for the industry? I feel like it's really holding a lot of shit back. I feel that like it being such a juggernaut is stifling a lot of innovation that could be done with like systems that have like faster load times and, you know, can run Unreal Engine 5 and the amount of like development tools that are available there and the potential there. Like I think with the Switch 1, you know, blowing everything out of the water, and the Switch 2 poised to probably do the same thing. Like, I think ultimately, like it holds a lot of innovation back. I know y'all disagree with that. That's fine. That's just how I feel. You know, and I think things could change. Like, I think my big thing a lot with Nintendo is like kind of waiting for the old guard to die off. Like, I'm ready for like Miyamoto and Aonuma to just, they don't have to die, but they can, you know, ride off into the sunset and let some new blood take their places. And I want to see what those guys do. I want to see what like some fresh idea makers at Nintendo are capable of, because it really does feel a lot like, you know, late stage WCW, where it's just the old guys like just like keeping the young talent down. And I want to see what that young talent can do. But I think that's about all I've got to say about that. This is probably a really bad idea. I don't know. I don't know how much of this I'm going to have to edit. I feel like I flowed pretty well there, but we'll see. I bet when I go back and edit it, it's going to feel really terrible. And I'm going to have to edit so many ums and pauses and shit. But it felt like I kind of flowed into one thing after another. I guess top tier patrons will know for sure, because that's where you can watch the video version of this, where it'll be like basically unedited. I think I'm just going to trim off like the front of it. But the one that comes to the podcast feed is going to just be an edited version. So, we'll see. You super fans can listen to the audio version and then go watch the video version and see which one you prefer. But I'm going to do it, or I'm not going to do it. This is going to do it for this episode of the Julian Titus Show, starring Julian Titus. Join this RSS feed next week with the season premiere of the Stage Select with Julian Titus and Justin Ham. Gotcha. You thought that this was a new thing and that I was screwing Justin over. But no, it's not. It's not that. This is just a dumb thing that I'm starting to regret the longer that I stay on this microphone. So I'm going to take off. Take a page out of Justin's streaming booklet. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.